Devouring silence. Returning to my childhood home after 20 years felt like being swallowed by the mouth of a grave I had buried too shallow. The house loomed at the end of the street, silent and rotting. Its windows, once gleaming with warmth, now glared back at me like dead eyes. Jean squeezed my hand as we stood on the front porch, his smile bright and optimistic. He believed this trip was good for me, that facing the past would bring me some kind of closure. He didn't know. He couldn't possibly know. As soon as we stepped inside, the air thickened, stifling. The house reeked of damp wood and memories I had tried desperately to forget. It felt alive, like it was breathing around us. The walls seemed to pulse, and the floorboards creaked in a slow, rhythmic beat, as if the house had been waiting for me to come back. My chest tightened. My eyes were drawn to the spot at the top of the stairs, where my father had once stood, his face twisted with an expression I had never been able to forget. His eyes had been vacant, his skin pale and clammy. He had looked at me, but I knew he hadn't seen me. He had been somewhere else, lost in whatever darkness had claimed him. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and forced a smile for Jean. He was already chattering about knocking down walls and painting, his enthusiasm infectious. But the house didn't want to be changed. It felt wrong, like it was pushing back, resisting his joy with its oppressive weight. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Every noise, every creak of the house sounded like a whisper, like something just beyond the edge of hearing. I kept thinking about the Greenfields, Mr. Greenfield, who had always been kind, and Anna, his strange, hauntingly beautiful wife. My mother had never liked Anna, had said there was something off about her. I hadn't understood back then, but I did now. Oh God, I did now. The next day, I couldn't help myself. I had to know if they were still there, the Greenfields, Anna. When I knocked on their door, the dread was thick enough to choke on. The house hadn't changed at all. The same faded siding, the same peeling paint, like time had passed it by. My heart pounded in my chest as the door creaked open. It was her, Anna, but she hadn't aged a day. Her face was as flawless as it had been when I was a child, her long dark hair cascading over her shoulders. She smiled, but it was wrong. Too wide, her eyes too cold. The air around her seemed to shimmer, and for a moment I could swear her face flickered, like a ripple in a pond disturbed by something lurking underneath. "Hello," she said, her voice syrup sweet, too sweet, like rot covered in honey. "You're new here, aren't you?" I lied. I told her I had just moved in, but her eyes flicked to mine, and I knew she remembered me. I saw it in the way her smile tightened, the way her fingers twitched at her sides, the way the air grew colder as she stood there, like she was holding something back, something dark and hungry. I stumbled through the conversation, then hurried home, my heart pounding in my ears. Jean found me in the kitchen, shaking, my breath shallow. I told him about Anna, how she hadn't aged, how something was wrong, but Jean, ever rational, tried to calm me down. "Lucy, you're overreacting," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Maybe it's not Anna. Maybe it's her daughter or something. People don't just stay the same after 20 years. But I knew better. I remembered better. As the days went on, Jean began to change. At first it was subtle. He would zone out during conversations, his eyes drifting toward the window. Then I caught him, one night, standing by the window, staring across at the Greenfields house. His gaze was locked on Anna, who stood outside in her garden, her movements slow and deliberate, almost like a dance. His face was slack, his eyes glazed, and his breath came in shallow gasps. I called his name, but he didn't respond. I had to physically shake him before he snapped out of it, blinking as if he had just woken from a dream. "What the hell, Jean?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger and fear. "What were you doing?" He looked at me, confused, like he didn't even know what had just happened. I I don't know. She's just beautiful, isn't she? It was happening again, just like with my father. The house seemed to breathe with the tension, its walls groaning like an old beast stretching its limbs. The shadows in the corners grew darker, thicker, like tar spreading across the room, creeping toward me. I started to hear things, whispers, faint and distant, calling my name in the dead of night. Then, one night, Gene didn't come home. I knew where he was. I grabbed the axe from the shed. Gene had been using it to chop wood for the fireplace, and made my way to the Greenfields' house. The air was thick, almost suffocating, as if the very night was alive, pressing down on me. Through the window I saw him, Gene. He was in Anna's bedroom, standing in the center of the room like a puppet on strings. Anna was there, too, but she wasn't Anna anymore. Her skin rippled, bulging, and splitting. Her beautiful face melted away like wax, revealing something grotesque beneath, a mass of writhing, blackened flesh, eyes that glowed with the sickening light. Too many teeth, too many limbs, all moving in a horrible rhythmic pattern. She let out a low, guttural sound that made my bones vibrate. And Gene, he stepped forward, his body moving on its own, like he was under a spell. I screamed, and the thing that had once been Anna turned toward me, its eyes locking onto mine. It opened its mouth, impossibly wide, revealing rows upon rows of teeth, and in one swift motion it devoured Gene, his body vanishing into the black maw. I didn't think. I swung the axe. The door shattered beneath the force of my blows, and I charged into the room, rage and terror driving me forward. The monster lunged at me, its arms, too long, too twisted, reaching out. I swung the axe again and again, each blow tearing through its flesh, black ichor spraying across the room. It shrieked, the sound high-pitched and piercing, like a chorus of dying voices, but I didn't stop. Finally, with one last swing, I severed its head. The creature fell to the floor, its body convulsing, twitching, before finally going still. But it was too late. Gene was gone. I slumped against the wall, the axe slipping from my hands. The room was a nightmare of blood and viscera, but it was over. Anna, whatever she had been, was dead. But as I sat there, surrounded by the stench of death, I realized something. She had taken them all. My father, Gene, maybe even Mr. Greenfield. And this house, this place, it had let her. It had wanted her to. The house breathed again, slow and steady. It wasn't done with me yet.